Good morning, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Brett Miller. I'm the archivist, music librarian, and coordinator of the Emeritus Club at West Virginia Wesleyan College, and I'm going to be facilitating today's session, which is entitled Comparative Approaches to Pearl S. Buck. And we have three presenters who will be giving presentations in 20-minute increments, and then what we're going to do from a housekeeping perspective, we'll take questions at the end. We'll have a Q&A session. So I will be timing them and giving them little indications, and we may just take a moment to switch between presentations. For our Q&A session, I'll let you know right now at the beginning, please speak up. This session is being recorded, and so I'll repeat your question back, but if you do have a question, please project up to the front so that we can hear that and repeat that for the recording. And just for your reference, if anyone needs restrooms, are down the hall to the left. So. It is my pleasure to begin by welcoming Annie Fleming from West Virginia Wesleyan to the podium.
Thank you. Pearl Buck referred to the area where she lived as the Appalachia of China. When I read The Good Earth, I was struck by the similarities of the lives of these poor farmers with the lives of Appalachian people. The book opens with Wang Lung's wedding day. He is trying to decide whether to take a bath or not. Water is a precious resource, and it seems a waste to him, but he wants to be clean for his new wife. He goes to the house of Huang, the wealthiest people in town, to get his bride, a slave called Olan. He becomes more aware of his own poverty and appearance and feels unworthy and intimidated by the very gates of the house. He finally meets Olan, and they go through the traditional ceremony before the gods that makes them husband and wife. Olan is plain, has a large round face and big feet. She has been a slave since childhood when she was sold into bondage by her family during a famine. Her unbound feet are the first thing Wang Lung notices about her. He would like to have a beautiful wife with bound feet so that others would envy him, but that woman cannot always do the work that is necessary for a farm. There is an immediate change in the house when Olan moves in. All she knows is work. She does the cooking and cleaning. She mends things that are torn and begins sewing clothes and shoes. She takes care of Wang Lung's elderly father, tending to him carefully and respecting him. She knows how to save money and how to prepare and preserve food. After Olan finishes all the household responsibilities, she comes out to the fields and helps him plant, hoe, and harvest. She continues to work in the fields up to the time of childbirth, having the baby by herself and then promptly returning to her husband's side. Olan gives birth to 3 sons, which increases her favor in the status of Wang Lung. It is Olan who recognizes the financial problems in the House of Huang, resulting in Wang Lung being able to purchase some of their land, adding to his own meager farm. When the drought comes, the family moves to the city. Olan knew if they didn't leave, they would surely starve to death. The family travels south to an area that is totally alien to them. They don't speak or understand the dialect, even though the language is the same. The culture of the city is very different from what they are used to. They are looked down upon and made fun of because of their speech, their appearance, and their lack of education or sophistication. Wang Lung finds work pulling a rickshaw, while Olan takes the children to the streets to beg. Wang Lung does not like this begging, but Olan does what she has to do to keep the family surviving. When the house of the wealthy family where they are encamped is ransacked, Wang Lung takes money from the homeowner. With this money, they are able to return home. One night, he discovers that Olan has hidden a small sack of jewels in her shirt. She admits that she took them from the wealthy family's hiding place. Wang Lung convinces her to part with all of the jewels, except for 2 small pearls, which she begs to keep for herself. This is the only thing she possesses that is completely hers. With the other jewels, he is able to buy the rest of the Huang's property. Olan's role changes with this new wealth. Her identity is that of a farmer and keeper of the house. She has been replaced in the fields by workers, and Wang Lung criticizes her for not hiring help for the household and children. Her health has also begun to suffer. Wang Lung becomes more critical of her appearance, pointing out her ugly face and big feet. He also criticizes her body, even though it is the way it is because she gave him 3 sons. He becomes bored and restless with less work to do and begins to visit a young woman, a prostitute, in the city, eventually taking her home to be his concubine. Olan is now displaced on the farm, her own home, and in her marriage. Wanglong buys jewels and many gifts for the girl. He even forces Olan to give up her prized pearls, and for the first time, he sees Olan cry. Olan sees that her husband does not value her at all. In a way, this caused her to give up even more in terms of her health. He has the pearls made into earrings for his second wife. Olan refuses medical treatment, saying the money could be better used to buy more property. While it is too late, Wanglong begins to realize all that Olan had done for him throughout their marriage. He knows that although she is just a woman, not worthy of consideration or respect, she helped him become more successful, and she gave him sons. He regretted his actions towards her, but he especially remembered her tears. The pearls were the only beautiful things she had in the world, and he took them from her. The house ceases to function after her death. There are no meals, and there is no organization. Wanglong eventually buys the former house of Huang. Problems continue, though, as the sons do not get along and the wives constantly bicker. Wanglong and Olan had educated their sons, but these sons were no longer interested in the land, except for its monetary value. When Wanglong was old and nearing death, he overheard his sons making plans to sell the land once he died. He begged them and pleaded with them not to sell the land, because it had always been a source of sustainability to the family. The story of Olan is about keeping the family together, overcoming hardship, and coping day to day with the struggles of farming. It is also about accepting the fact that no matter how hard she worked or how much of an asset she was to her husband, in the end, she was only a woman with unbound feet to Wanglong. Because she was not a source of pride to Wanglong, she had no value to him or to the world in which she lived. But what does this story have to do with Appalachia? What comparisons can we draw from the life of Olan to the lives of women in Appalachia during the early 20th century? The experiences of my great-grandmother, Julia Johnson, show parallels to how poverty is not limited to one particular area of the world, and women's roles are not completely dissimilar. It also depicts that even if money is scarce, having land is wealth in itself. Julia and her husband Roy lived in eastern Kentucky. They married in 1933 when she was just 16 and he was 21. She was the fourth of 12 children and he was the youngest of 11. By contrast, they only ended up having 6 children, my grandmother being the second born. Although she lived in a rural area, Julia was influenced by the hair and fashion trends of the 1920s. And at 15, she decided to try out being a flapper and bobbed her hair. When she told my mother the story, she still laughed at being so daring. With his older siblings married, Roy, as the youngest, was still at home helping to work on the farm. This land was over 100 acres and had been in the family for almost a century. In addition to working the fields, Roy's mother had been a midwife, or granny woman. She traveled by horseback all over the countryside, helping people deliver babies. She delivered 5 of Julia's children. When they married, Roy and Julia moved in with his elderly parents to help care for them, much like Olan served Wanglong's father. As a girl raised in the country, Julia knew how to work, clean, and help in the fields. Necessity taught her how to improve these skills for housekeeping and child rearing. In contrast to Olan, Julia experienced more equality in her life. She had equal responsibilities on the farm and saw this as her duty. She saw herself as part of what it took to keep things going. It was simply day-to-day living for her. Every day, Roy milked the cows by hand and fed all the livestock and worked in the fields. Julia built a fire and cooked 3 meals a day over a wood stove. The noon meal was always ready when they came in from their chores, and they had no indoor plumbing or electricity, and the only running water was a nearby creek. She canned and cooked vegetables from their gardens and made jams and jellies from their apple trees and grapevines. She did the washing in a large cast iron kettle over a fire pit in the yard. Together with their children, they worked in the fields. She helped with the slaughtering of animals and processed the meat, storing it for future use in the warm house that was built into the side of the hill. She used the fat for lard and soap, and she used the milk from their cows to churn butter. Although they had a great deal of land, much of it was hilly and rocky and not really meant for farming, but they still managed to have several gardens and a tobacco patch. As soon as their children were old enough to hold a hoe, they were put to work. My grandmother said she and her older brother started working in the fields by the time they were about 3. My great-grandparents were never idle. My mother said that Julia was always busy. Even if she was sitting down, she was shucking corn, shelling peas, or breaking beans. She might also be mending or sewing, although she wasn't very good at it, I hear. She made all the clothing for the family. The girls got dresses made out of flour sacks. I can imagine that, like Julia, Olan never had time to be idle. Although the work never ended, there was time every evening to read the Bible and pray. Faith was very important to the family. They fed the animals and did what was necessary, but Sunday was the day of rest. Neither Julia nor her husband had much schooling. She finished the 7th grade and he finished 3rd, but education was incredibly important to them, and all 6 of their children graduated high school. This was a source of pride and an increase in social status for them, much like it was for Olan and Wang Lung. After graduation, 5 of their children left homes for jobs in the city. Only my grandmother stayed behind to help them. By then, Roy and Julia were getting their old age pension, and although it wasn't much, that and the sales of their tobacco each year provided income. Julia, who had never had anything pretty or even had time to think of her appearance, began going to secondhand stores. She bought jewelry, particularly colorful necklaces and beads and brooches. She bought colorful shirts for Roy and dresses for herself. Every Sunday, she showed them off at church. They eventually moved out of the old house into a mobile home. They moved onto the property. With central heating and running water, life was much easier. They kept one garden and worked in it every year until they couldn't physically do it anymore. Julia took care of Roy. In their older years, his needs very much came before hers. In the old saying, the man is the head of the household and the woman is the neck, and whichever way the neck turns, the head follows, applies to the case of my great-grandparents. Julia took charge in the family and was not just an equal partner in decision-making, she often told her husband what to do. Roy died in 1999, and very soon thereafter, Julia developed Alzheimer's disease. My mother says it was almost as if she waited until he didn't need her anymore before she finally gave in. She died in 2003. The traditionally held belief is that Appalachia is a region of poor people and rich land. During this particular time, the early 20th century, families still maintain the traditions of their ancestors, and this applies to my great-grandparents. They farmed and, like Wang Lung, prayed for a good harvest each year so their family would be fed. They worked the land from sunrise to sunset, and every family member had their responsibilities. If they didn't, there was no food. Women of Appalachia worked alongside men in the fields, but that's not where their work ended each day. They did all the cooking, cleaning, making and mending of clothes, caring for children and the elderly in the house. Although they may not have spoken of it as wealth, if a family had land, they had all they needed to provide for their family if they were willing to work. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, much like rural China, economic changes came to Appalachia. Industry brought a great deal of destruction to the area. The railroads being built cut through and destroyed a great deal of farmland. Logging depleted forests and caused the area to erode and flood. People had always cut trees and built homes or burned it for fuel, but logging destroyed entire forests. Then there was the coal. This was a resource that Appalachians knew they had, and they used it to heat their homes and cook their meals. But they didn't see any other value, and the industries in the north needed coal and sent representatives to Appalachia to buy it. Like Wang Lung, the people would not sell their land. The companies offered money, which most Appalachians didn't have, for the mineral rights to the land, saying they could keep their property. After the destruction of their property, people were fortunate if they could raise a small garden. The early coal industry destroyed the region's autonomy. Families were forced off of what was left of their farms, and if they worked in the mines, had to live in a coal camp, with hundreds of other families in poverty, and worse, indebted to the coal companies. To parallel what was happening in the Appalachian region, The railroads were also being built through China, taking people's land and resources in order to industrialize and reap the benefits. This is reflective of what Pearl Buck meant when she talked about the Appalachia of China. You have two peoples on different sides of the world, and their situation is the same because their own countrymen see them as backward, ignorant, uneducated, and easily taken advantage of. Roy and Julia were not minors, but all of their children left the area to seek other jobs. My grandmother, the only one who stayed close, also moved out of state for a while when her husband went north seeking a job. In this, they were similar to Wang Lung and Olan, who left to go to the city. The culture was unfamiliar, the language was the same, but the dialect was much different. After 3 years, they managed to return home. Olan and Julia may have lived in different countries and experienced different cultural beliefs, but they were similar in many of their experiences as women on a farm. Olan lived in a culture where females had little to no value except for working and bearing sons. Even her daughters are referred to as slaves. Olan was never shown any appreciation for her work, for the work she did, and it wasn't until her death that her husband even began to recognize her value. My great-grandmother lived in a country where she did not have equal rights on paper. She was in a marriage with a man she chose, and in which she was an equal partner. She had no individualism, however, but she didn't really expect it. The property is still in the family. No one lives there, but the old house still stands. My grandmother and her youngest brother are the only ones who wish to keep it in the family. The others, like Olan's sons, have wanted to sell it. This is the link to the past and past generations. It is home. The land calls my grandmother back because she grew up working it. It calls her younger brother back because of the happiness and joy he knew from playing in the fields. The land turns out not to be just richness in an economic sense, but a richness of the soul, something that becomes a part of you and defines you as a person. Olan knew and felt this, and so did Julia. In the end, Olan and Julia shared the same identity. They thought of themselves as farmers, not so much as women. In fact, I would say that because they were farmers, they had more of a voice in their day-to-day lives than women living in the city or who were in a more middle class. Agriculture gave them strength and power. While they had to give up their female identity, they were still the hub of the family. Without them, the family could not function. So as humanity as we know it cannot go on without the cultivation of land, the family cannot go on if someone does not sacrifice their own identity and individualism for everyone else's sake. I just wanted to go show you guys some pictures. This is my great-grandparents' wedding photo, and as you can see, my great-grandmother's hair is not recovered from her experiment. This is the old house that is technically still standing. It's in pretty bad shape, though. The woman who is second from left in the second row, that's my great-grandmother, and the women on the bottom are her younger sisters, and you can see who had to work on the farm and who didn't. So, and these next photos, that is my great-great-grandmother, who was the granny woman, and I think the clothes that they are wearing and the clothes hanging on the clothesline back there just kind of show you their lives, their everyday lives, and it shows you that China, you know, if you showed a picture of rural China in this time, I think you would fail to see many differences. So that's what inspired me to write this paper for you guys. Thank you.